let's talk about how this scene from episode 1 of Severance basically spoils the ending of the season 2 finale. Or how this shot might be a subtle clue that Dr. Wagabi is actually an undercover Lumon agent. Or the real reason why Kier Egan strictly only wears black. Severance has always been a masterclass in storytelling, not just through its intricate script, but through its visual storytelling as well. Every detail from set design to color palettes is crafted with intention. So, let's talk about color theory and how it shapes our understanding of the Severance story. I'm sure you've already noticed the significance of red and blue. After all, the show introduces this concept right from the very first episode. Mark essentially lives in two separate worlds, each defined by its own color palette. One bathed in warm red tones, the other in cold blue hues. And we actually get a major clue about this early on. His fish tank. It visually tells us everything. Two lives, completely separate, just like his severed self. Red represents the outie world, from Mark's red sweater to Rickon's foodless dinner to the warm lighting of their home. Blue, on the other hand, dominates Lumon's severed floor, from Mark's blue suit to his blue crystal cube, his blue band-aid, and the icy tones of the office. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they actually reflect the deep divide between Mark's innie and his outie. And as the story unfolds, the way these colors interact or start to blur tells us more than we might realize at first glance. Red and blue have dominated the show's visual language, clearly aligning with the innie and outie environments. However, Severance isn't built around just these two colors alone. The show actually operates on sRGB, the official color standard of the IEC since 1996. And funnily enough, sRGB is embedded right in the MDR team. Mark S, Hallie R, Dylan G, and Irving B. That's RGB for you, red, green, and blue. Now each of these colors carries a distinct meaning, shaping not just the show's aesthetic, but its thematic depth. This video aims to break down what these colors represent, how they function within Lumon's world, and how they enhance the show's visual storytelling while fueling deeper theories. Let's start with blue, a color often associated with trust, safety, and reliability. It makes perfect sense that Lumon, a medical company, claiming to eliminate pain altogether, would drench its severed floor in blue tones. The cool, sterile aesthetic reassures both employees and the outside world that Lumon is in control. But Lumon isn't just blue, it's also green. Some have argued that green is simply a complementary color to blue, chosen for aesthetic balance. But I don't think that's the case. Green isn't just there because it looks good. It's there because it's intrinsically tied to the severance procedure itself. And to understand why, let's hear what James Egan has to say about the severance chip.
Do you remember when I brought home the first chip to show you? The prototype. It had the blue and green lights back then.
The severance chip emits blue and green lights, and that's no accident. Green represents the mind itself, the force that blocks the transmission of information. From what we understand about the chip, it doesn't store or record memories. Instead, it prevents the brain from accessing how or why certain knowledge exists. Take Irving, for example. We know he appreciates art. He paints, he sketches, but while he retains this skill in both his innie and outie states, he has no conscious understanding of why or how he knows it. The chip isolates the knowledge from its source, yet the capability remains. Now, green is often linked to nature, growth, and life itself, which aligns with Lumon's public image. The company presents itself as a beacon of progress, supposedly eliminating pain and suffering from people's lives. Of course, that's far from truth, but in the marketing sense, the combination of blue being trust and safety and green being growth and renewal reinforces their carefully curated image. Then there's black, a color reserved for authority figures within Lumon. We see it in the wardrobes of Mr. Grainer, Mr. Drummond, and Natalie, all of whom wield power within a company. However, you'll notice that their outfits always incorporate hints of white, a subtle but important detail that we'll come back to later. Now, shifting from clothing to interior design, let's talk about how colors define the different departments within Lumen. MDR is fundamentally tied to the creation of innies, something we suspected early on, but later got concrete confirmation from Ms. Cobell. This explains why MDR is bathed in blue, reinforcing its role in shaping and controlling the severed experience, from blue keyboards, blue mugs, to blue access cards. Every element in MDR's workspace is a visual representation of their purpose, to generate and sustain the innie state. However, you've definitely noticed something interesting. MDR's dominant color is actually green, while OND's dominant color is actually blue. I've previously argued that the connection between blue and green isn't just a matter of visual design. It actively reflects how these two departments operate. Because of this, it makes perfect sense that both blue and green are heavily integrated into their environments. These colors aren't just design choices, they serve as visual markers for Lumen's core objectives. Now, OND operates differently. Rather than creating innies, they focus on reinforcing the barrier between innie and outie. They do this by printing objects used for testing on the testing floor. We first get a hint of this when Dr. Maurer comes to collect objects from OND. Another subtle reference is when Irving mentions the exports hall to Felicia, hinting that OND's work extends beyond simple office supplies. These objects serve a crucial purpose. They are designed to test the barriers of the mind. Just as green blocks blue from reaching red, OND's creations reinforce the Severance blockade. By the way, if you're actually interested in these barriers and how they work in practice, I suggest you check out my thorough analysis on this very topic. Let's examine a key piece of evidence. Dylan steals a green card from OND, triggering the first OTC event. Later, we find out that these ego death cards were directly connected to Gemma's kidnapping. These printed cards were likely designed to blur the barrier, either by luring Gemma deeper into the blue or by outright kidnapping her for experimentation. On the same shot, we can also see various printed objects scattered around OND, which later appear on the testing floor. Dentistry equipment shows up in Wellington, the watering can shows up in Allentown, and the musical instruments are used in the Department of Choreography and Merriment. This marching band department, interestingly, uses both blue and green, but red is notably absent. And that brings us to the role of red in Lumen's color theory, which we'll break down next. One last comment before we move on to red. Did you also notice that the Go department uses green as well? Why do you think that is? Please let me know your theories in the comments. I'm so curious to know what you think about that. This is also a great time to like and subscribe if you enjoyed these deep dives. My take is that the goat department is another part of the testing process. They sacrifice the goats to finalize the test subjects. Lorne brought Emile as part of the finishing touches of Cold Harbor, making the goat department another crucial part of the testing floor. So it makes perfect sense for them to use green as well, just like OND.
Emile thanks you.
Alright, now all I see is red. Red represents intense emotions: anger, danger, passion, and most importantly, love. This is why it makes perfect sense that the first prototype for Severance excluded red entirely. In the season 2 finale, we learn that James Egan does not love Helena, his own legitimate child, nor any of his illegitimate children. If he had experienced love, we wouldn't get that moment where Cobell says,
She's one of James. No one's to know.
I've noticed that some creators call these children quote-unquote love children, but I think it's important to be precise. These children were not born out of love. If they were, their mothers wouldn't have given birth to them in secrecy, hidden from the world and in the middle of the night. These children are a result of James' ongoing abuse and control. Since James has never truly understood love, it makes sense that he wouldn't realize how red, the color of love, could act as a barrier breaker within Severance. This is exactly why Mark is able to break through and reach Gemma. Love transcends the Severance barrier, and because of this, Gemma ultimately fails her efficacy test. This is brilliant storytelling. Severance is vulnerable to love because its creators never accounted for it. Red is extremely rare on the Severance floor, but when it does appear, it stands out in a powerful way. For instance, the candle stolen by Miss Cobell from Mark's basement once belonged to Gemma. Later, it's given to Miss Casey during a wellness session. A mini efficacy test to see if Mark is susceptible to reintegration. Notably, this candle is red and green, visually representing the battle between love, being red, and the severance blockade, being green. Rickon's book is another good example, because it feels completely out of place in the Lumon environment. While it doesn't necessarily symbolize love, it does represent a connection to the outside world, something that the severed floor is meant to be cut off from. Jeremy Hindle, the brilliant production designer of Severance, once said, "This season, everything's blue. The only time we see red, I had to really fight for it. Red is only when it's love." This quote alone made me go back and analyze every instance of red in the show, and what I found was fascinating. The music dance experience is one of the most memorable moments in Severance, and it's bathed in red. The event happens immediately after Dylan learns he has a child, singular at the time. The red in this scene represents his anger, his frustration at missing out on an entire life, but also his love for his child, which drives his desperation to know his name. As Helly completes her file, red dominates the scene. This moment highlights her growing relationship with Mark, a love interest that is slowly developing between them. At the Duriboh, red surrounds both Mark and Helly, and this is crucial. It symbolizes Innie Mark's love for Helly and Helena's love for Innie Mark. The fact that the red engulfs both of them foreshadows a complex emotional entanglement between their two identities. However, in the Zufu restaurant, the red shifts in meaning. Helena is watching Mark, and the contrast is striking. Helena's love for Mark is present, while Mark's love for Helena is absent. This one-sided dynamic is visually reinforced by the background details. While many focus on the trophies behind Mark, the true emphasis is on how red is being used. Red is once again prominent, but this time it's not about innies versus outies. It's purely about love. You can pinpoint the exact moment where Gemma's love fails to transcend, as the red physically moves away from her and toward Helly instead. This moment confused many viewers, particularly regarding the distinction between Helly and Helena. But this is where understanding Innie red versus love red becomes crucial. We've talked extensively about red, blue, and green. But what happens when the colors start to mix? This brings us to reintegration, the process of blending the Innie and outie identities together. The show introduced this concept early on, subtly hinting at the struggle between the two selves through color. The earliest visual cue of reintegration occurs when PD is staying at Mark's basement. He's seen wearing Rickon's robe, which is split between blue and red. Importantly, this robe belongs to Rickon, which is something I'm going to touch on at the end of the video, so stay tuned. But for now, let's focus on PD. Later, when PD is suffering from reintegration sickness, the robe's design mirrors his condition. The blue and red remain separate, symbolizing his mind's inability to fully merge his two identities. This visually reinforces why his reintegration ultimately fails. His innie and outie selves cannot fully mix. Just like PD, we see a parallel with Mark post-reintegration. Blood appears on his blue suit, symbolizing the presence of his red outie soul bleeding onto his innie identity. This is a brilliant visual metaphor because reintegration isn't instant. It's messy, painful, and marked by signs of the two selves colliding. There's also purple. Purple is a mixture of red being the outie and blue being the innie, a perfect representation of full reintegration. The only time we see Mark in purple hue is during the Duriboh sequence, when he has a vision of Gemma. This moment suggests for a brief instant his two selves are fully connected, a foreshadowing of his eventual reintegration. This transitions us perfectly into a deeper discussion about purple, which represents the ultimate breaking of the severance barrier. Purple is a mix of red and blue, and a successful mix at that. It's when the innie and outie meet without barriers, which of course sounds like a Dylan moment. When Gretchen visits Dylan's innie, she's always wearing purple, visually representing that she's the bridge between innie Dylan and outie Dylan. It's not just about what she wears. Photos displayed on the monitors also capture her in purple clothing, reinforcing this connection. Now, there are two other versions of purple that I want to talk about. Very early on in season 1, we see Irving wearing a purple vest. At the time, we don't yet realize that his outie has been trying to communicate with his innie. Though it eventually becomes successful, at that moment it's still incomplete. Which is why the purple appears darker. It visually represents an attempt that hasn't fully worked out yet. There's also this one expansion room that is distinctly purple, and Mark specifically says,
"The departments are pretty spaced out, but it'll all fill in one day. They're planning an expansion."
I wonder if that expansion was meant to integrate innies and outies, hence the visible shade of purple. Could this be a major clue for season 3, now that we've seen what has happened? Interestingly enough, the barriers in this room look puce to me, which makes me curious about what Mark W. and Gwendolyn Y. had to say about this.
But I love the green carpet. Ours was a creme brulee and the keyboards were puce.
They were purple.
No, they were puce, I know, because it makes me nauseous.
Beyond that, we also see Dr. Wagabi's earrings. Like Helena, she wears blue and green earrings. I wonder if this suggests that Dr. Wagabi is still an undercover agent for Lumon, meaning Mark's reintegration was planned long before any of this, or that she's involved with Lumon in a way we don't fully understand yet. I mean, think of all the access that she has, and all the expensive equipment that she's dragging around. Is this like a secret plan from Lumon, or someone inside Lumon? And finally, I can't help but wonder if Myrtle Egan's red outfit holds some unknown significance. Meanwhile, Cure himself is always seen in black. Does this symbolize a deliberate absence of blue, green, or red? If so, does this mean that Cure's ultimate goal is a completely blank slate, designed to create the perfect obedient soldier for Lumon's master plan? Ultimately, world domination? I want to discuss what I teased earlier. Our new understanding of blue, red, purple, and everything in between has led me to a pretty wild theory. Rickon might be severed. If not severed, then something eerily close to it. And honestly, I think this could be a huge twist for season 3. I've gathered some compelling evidence to back this up, but I wanted to introduce the color theory first before diving into that. So, would you be interested in a video breaking down that theory? Please let me know in the comments. And that brings me to the end of another deep dive. Thank you so much for watching. How do you feel about all this? Do you have any theories of your own when it comes to the color symbolism? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you've noticed any hidden details that I might have missed. And don't worry, there are still a couple more videos coming. There's a lot more to uncover, but until then, take care and stay safe.